Beginnen.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the relaunch of meetups. At least it has been since, I think, before Corona. So Gabriel couldn't be here tonight, unfortunately, but they made me co-host or something, so I was able to set this up. So this meetup is, between quotes, sponsored by Delta Blue. It's a company where I work in, where Jonas works in, and some other people here as well. Please, not there, but there's.
I was looking for an open spot.
Yeah. So I'm going to like to introduce you to Tim Adelas. I know Tim a long time. So golden guy, extremely talented at a lot of things. Yeah. He's a resident at Tomorrowland. There's also always something to we could, how do you call it, Stufe? I don't know. Brag about when he was still working at Delta Blue. Unfortunately, it took another path in his life for the good. But he's happy to, I was talking about we want to do something like, so why are we doing this talk? We want to do something about open API, document-driven development, so on. And I came across a post of Tim. He worked at AppyDeck, or still is?
No, not anymore.
Well, at some point he worked at AppyDeck, and he did a talk about that. And I said, damn, that's interesting. I shared it in the internals channel on Slack in our company. And I said, this is something I want to go to. So, but how do you get started on that? So the idea was, maybe I'll ask Tim. If he could do a demo in our company to do a presentation, how to get started in something like that, how that it works. And then the idea came, well, maybe we shouldn't do this just for our company. Maybe it could be interesting for other people as well. Talk to Gabriel. He said, yeah, we can do a meetup, but I don't have the time. You have to do it. Say, all right. So this is basically why we're here. So this is a dry run of his presentation. So be mild. Huh? That's right. Huh? Mild.
Yeah, mild.
Don't be harsh. So I mean, he does this. You do it for free, huh? Right?
Yeah, it's for free. I get paid in
Tomorrow I
peers.
get an invoice, something like that. So it's your first tryout, basically. So Tim, you were an experienced speaker, but I think with Corona it also had some slowdown. Yes,
Yeah, I think it depends on who you ask if you experienced or not. So,
yeah. So, but I'm very hopeful. So I know Tim very well, and he's very talented. So thank you very much, Tim.
okay,
The floor is yours.
thank you. Yeah, welcome everybody. Happy to see so many familiar faces. It feels like a reunion more or less, and paid by Delta Blue. So thank you, Bram, for hosting this. Yeah, today's talk is about unlocking the power of spec-driven development. But before I get started, let me quickly introduce myself. Already Bram did most of it. So I'm an API and event enthusiast. After hours, I work on several open source projects. Why is the beamer? Okay. One of them is Portman, another one is Postman to K6, another one is Open API format, event catalog. I get sponsored by JetBrains. They pay me a license to do the open source work, so that's nice. So I'll give them a bit of credit as well. Bit my career. So I started as a product manager. I just started actually this week at Trendminer, also Quarter Campus. So I'm switching jobs in between. I worked at NASCOM. There were people here from NASCOM. I worked at Celgent Marigold. A lot of people from Celgent Marigold are here. NASCOM is one of the companies I already mentioned that, an API deck. That's my previous company I worked for. And I used to be a PM at Delta Blue. So that's a bit about me. So the spec-driven workflow for APIs is nothing to do with coding. So if you're here for coding or development practices, that's not going to be the topic of today. It's more about giving you the tools to become spec-driven or API-driven in that regard. So like Bram said, he reached out to me because he was very interested. And so that's why I built the slide deck. I got very good feedback on my podcast for K6. And so that's why I try to get another round or a bit more depth into the presentation and give it a bigger picture as well. So the table of the contents of the session is about, I'll do a short kickoff. It's mostly memes because we're all into memes. So I think half of the slide deck is meme. The rest is just pictures of software that I'll be using. I do a very, very short topic on specifications. Then I explain a bit the spec-driven development concepts, what they are and why I'm using them. And then I'm going to just kick it off with examples. So I will be switching between the PowerPoint presentation, between Postman and my IDE. So bear with me, because from here, my IDE looks huge and I have to figure out how my mouse would click and where it would click. So let's see. So I needed a team for today's session, since my kids are very much into Marvel, especially Groot, Guardians of the Galaxy, and Raccoon or Rocket Raccoon. This was the team. So that's the team I will be using throughout the demo. Okay, I think we're at the point where we all have been there. You just launched your API, the long-awaited milestone is reached. Your API is live and people are ready to start using it. But then what happens next? All the mails start dripping in. Typical mails will be like, where can I find the documentation? Because you just launched the API, but oh my God, where's the documentation? What you do, you quickly write down a Word document. That's the first question answer. Then the CTO comes to you and asks you, how fast can the thing go? Because I need to update the SLA. What's the rate limits? Give me all the intel. I need that for the enterprise customer.
I'm going to do something very bad, but I think you're not sharing your screen anymore. So we're missing the recording. Sorry for the interruption, but
no worries. Zoom is crashed. Can you, yeah.
It's leave meeting.
Where is it?
Yeah, it's on the other model too.
Yeah, but it's playing hide and seek somehow.
Yeah, your menu is on top of the non-projected part of the monitor.
I don't know where it is, Bram. Bring all to front.
Yes, sorry, I think it's this one.
Yeah.
Your screen. Yeah, it was gone.
Yeah. Better?
Back. Yeah.
No.
No.
Then another customers come to you and ask, he wants to play around with it because they want to start using it. So where can I experiment with it? Are there some docs? Is there a Postman collection? What do? You write some curl commands, send it over by email and hope that it will work. And then the next thing, support, Zendesk. You get flooded with support questions like, hey, one engineer is trying to use it and they get errors. So all these typical things, they come back and forth because lack of documentation. People start harassing you more or less. And then even in the next stage, I think most PM will recognize this. Oh my God, you get Slack messages because customer X wants to search, customer Y wants to have ordering, all these kind of things. So feature requests all around, and you need to start writing briefings for your team. And repeat the whole cycle again, because as soon as you release a new version of the API, they start harassing you again with all these questions. So what typically happens if you start writing emails, Slack messages, Jira documents, or user stories, you try to keep everything up to date, join calls with customers, and it's very frustrating because it feels like you're chasing your tail. Yeah? And a good developer experience is when you provide them the docs so that they can figure out them by themselves. That's very important. But if you're looking at the current state of APIs, so in past years, I had the pleasure of working with over 50 integrations or APIs. I can tell you, honestly, on my heart, it's a poor condition out there. Even the big ones like Oracle and everybody, they fail horrible with writing good API documentation. And it can be very simple, but you just need to put in a little bit of effort. And so that's a bit where the topic of today is about. So I was looking for ways to make my life easier and to give the developers who want to use my tools, to give them the documentation to get started by themselves. And that's a bit what I'm going to showcase today. So I'm going to build up slowly and gradually, like how do you start from nothing with no documentation, like I showcase in all the memes, to something where you have a lot of advantages. So then you can stop doing all these one-time efforts and you can start working on a better way. Because a clever colleague of mine once told me, you should be working not harder, you should be working smarter. And then he said that I should stop asking him to update all the documentation. So that's maybe somehow related, that he pushed me in that direction. And I think I found something that worked really well for me, and I used it at Celigent, Marigold, and used it at API Deck, and at my next company, TrendMiner, I'm also trying to introduce a bit the concepts that I'm preaching today. So this is the end result of what I've been coming to. So before you saw all this Word document and PDFs and emails floating around, and this is a spec-driven model. This is where you put your API spec in the middle, and as a result of that, you will get nice generated API documentation out of the box. You can even generate SDKs if you want to. You can have mock service, which can be useful while you're designing your APIs. You can have an API playground in Postman, all out of the box. And as cherry on the top, you can have contract testing and performance testing all generated for you. But that's my setup. Of course, you're free to use. So that's a bit the concept of today. I'm going to showcase some tools, some workflows that I apply, but there's no holy grail. It depends on your use case. But I just want to show you how simple, with some simple tools, you get a lot of benefit, a lot of value without doing all the hard work over and over and over again. I will be using this model, and that's the spec-driven model, more or less. And I will chop it up in pieces and explain piece by piece how it fits in the bigger picture. Already, first half of the presentation is already done, so that's good news. Any questions already? Everything clear? Is my voice okay? Can you everybody okay? Michael, you're okay? Good.
In general, or
yeah, in general. Okay, let's start with the API specification. That's the most important piece of the puzzle. That's where everything starts with. An API specification describes everything about your API. It describes the paths, the operations, the properties, the inputs, the outputs, the authentication, you name it. It should all be living and be updated in this single document. There are several formats. You have OpenAPI, you have RAML, you have API Blueprint, which was acquired by Oracle. You have Waddle, and I think you have some more exotic stuff, but let's not go in that direction. I chose OpenAPI because I'm a very big fan of it, and it's also the most popular one, so that's good to know. So maybe the first question, who's using OpenAPI? Okay, that's good. I think half of the audience. That's great. Just short history. It started in 2011 as Swagger. So some people might know Swagger. That's has a bigger brand name attached to it. It was owned by a company. You have two formats, it's in JSON format or YAML format. Some people like YAML a lot. It's used for describing REST API. It uses behind the scenes JSON schema. That's another specification where you can use to define properties, like saying this is a type of an integer of a string. And it's independent of any language or framework, meaning that it's just a specification. You just write it, it's text. There's no code attached to that. And the nice thing is ChatGPT speaks it fluently. So that makes your life a lot easier, but like a lot. Because it's so popular, there's a whole ecosystem around it with tools and modules. And the nice thing about it, it's not owned by a company or brand. There's no commercial value around OpenAPI. It's a specification. So you're free to use that, but it's backed and supported and used by a lot of big brands. Like Microsoft is a big advocate, Google, Salesforce, IBM, and there's a huge list of contributors and supporters of OpenAPI. When we talk about tooling, OpenAPI tools is like the catalog where you can find all the supported modules that you can just contribute to the list. And there are over 350 tools, modules available, and it's in various categories. It goes from converters to SDK generators to validators. Pretty much you name it, something will already exist around OpenAPI in commercial or in open source version. It depends, of course. When you look on Google, when you look on GitHub, for example, you can find 20,000 repositories that are using or referencing OpenAPI. So the community or the usage and adoption around OpenAPI is huge. So it's not something exotic. There is a strong community and a strong user base attached to it. So I briefly touch upon the centerpiece of the result set. This is the final result. So that I'm going to chop it up in pieces bit by bit. But before we do in that deep dive, I'm going to explain a bit the concepts around the architecture or the approach that I'm using. Typically, you will have code first. That's how I used to work as well. Pretty much a lot of people work that in the past. So you get business inputs, then you start writing code. And as a result of that, you start writing documentation, test, everything as an after effect of what you have been creating first. If you go for a design-first approach, you take the business input, you think first, you model first, you do some diagramming, you make some analysis, you document and design, and then you start writing code. A spec-driven development approach goes a bit further. It puts the spec at the center of pretty much everything. So this is the MuleSoft diagram. So I think they pretty much initiated spec-driven concept. I think in 2011 or something. It's a long time ago. And you can already see there's 3 stages. You have a design stage, implementation stage, and a management stage. But they all come back to the centerpiece, the API specification. This is the evolution of that model of MuleSoft. And it's it's been created or updated by Tier Goodwill. I'm just going to give him the credits for this. It's the same concept, although there are some small nuances that makes it a bit more suitable for modern approaches. For example, it takes into account deprecation, which MuleSoft did not. It makes something simpler, but again, it's just a concept where you work around, and using that concept, you can apply some things. I'm going to explain a bit the benefits, because I've been using it for quite years and I've been advocating to a lot of companies in the past, but these are the benefits that I already noticed from the early on, and better documentation, because anything you do with OpenAPI, it will lead to better documentation. And it's better to have some documentation than no documentation. But if you're starting using OpenAPI, you by design, and as a result of that, you will have better documentation altogether. You'll have clear requirements. So when you start briefing a team to develop something, it's hard to just say, I want to have a search, and then they start asking, is it a snake case, camel case? You start asking all the details, but if you have a clear specification written, all the requirements are clear. There is no doubt, it's there, and the format matches with what you need. The feedback loops are going to be shorter, because everything lives in that one document, so everybody can contribute to it, and can change it, and can give feedback on top of that. Because you have this one specification, you have a more consistent API design. Because if you look at your API from one point and you start developing it, and then next week you do another endpoint, you might miss some nuances. And if you look then at the end result, it can be a bit of a Frankenstein API with camel casing and operations going left and right, verbs not doing what they're supposed to do. So you get more consistent API design. It's easier to align your team around it, because they can contribute towards it and they can give feedback it. And what I really liked, and that's something, when you start using an API, that's the first thing you will notice, the docs match what the API does and vice versa. Sometimes you have an API that does something that's not documented, but sometimes you have a documentation and the API doesn't do what it's supposed to do. So that leaves you like, where the hell am I? And from a PM perspective, it's a much lower update effort. While before you had to write Word documents, I had to write user stories, I had to validate it, I had to update my Postman collection. All these topics, they all just went away because I just had to focus on one document that I had to maintain. And the output that's being generated, that's just bonus. You have nice looking documentations. You can use testing or to have test tools that generate tests for you. You can provide playgrounds for your customers, and you can even generate SDKs, which makes it an even higher level of an API usage. Okay, click the design stage. So now we're going to get into the more practical point of view. Designing means you start modeling, and modeling means you start specifying what are the properties of your endpoint, how should the endpoint look like. That's the design stage. The validate stage, I'm going to do that afterwards, is about validating how does your API or your end result of your design, how will it look like? Is it valid? Am I missing something? Looking a bit at the bigger picture of your API design. And then iterating, of course, is to keep it iterative. And as an end result, you will get nicely looking documentation, and documentation in a broad sense of the word. All good, Bram?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so this is the part where I'm opening up my EDA. So the first step is you have to write the OpenAPI specification. There's no way around it, because you have been writing Word documents, you have been writing emails, so there's no way around it. You have to start with something. Like I said, the nice thing is that OpenAPI speaks ChatGPT speaks OpenAPI fluently. So I'm not going to talk half an hour about OpenAPI and all the elements and how it works. I'm just going to use an existing example. There are some errors in it. I did it deliberately so I can showcase how you can fix them easily and that kind of thing. But I still need to give a bit of an introduction. So this is a YAML version of an OpenAPI. You see on top, it's the version of the specification. I'm using 3.0 or no, 3.03. You have some info. The info contains like the title, the version of your API. Then you have some server which reference to where is the base URL, the host located. I'm going to click it open so you can see this is localhost right now. Then you get to the interesting part. That's the paths, which describe on which endpoint your API lives. Components is for making elements reusable. For example, a query parameter or a header. If you have to type it 10 times, you can just use that and make that a component and then reuse it as a reference. So you don't have to copy paste everywhere. And if you make a typo, you have to change it everywhere. You just reference it and then manage it in one place. That's what component does and schemas does. Security tells you a bit about which security you're using, or you're using OAuth, bearer token, API key. There are a lot of default defined OpenAPI models for that. And tags is to just group elements together. So if I zoom in on a path, you see already things popping up, expanding. So this is characters. That's my first endpoint, the Marvel characters. Remember that. You see two things. It has a get and a post operation. That's the verb, the action you're doing. And then you have characters ID, that's the detail call, like we typically call it. And then you have a get, a put, and a delete. I'm not going to talk about patch, put, delete. That's not a discussion I want to have right here. But still, it's interesting. So that's the way you describe your API. Then you go a level deeper. A get, it has an ID. It's just unique. It gives you summary, description. You have the parameters. Hopefully that clicks open. Maybe if I click open everything at once, will that work? There we go. So here you see I reference the page parameters and the limit, if not mistaken. You can describe your response, a successful one, a failing one. You can reference that response again. And then you say it's a tag, so it belongs to the group of characters. For post, it's the same. You can define your request body, if there's a request body needed. You can define if it's required or not. You can even include inline examples. If you go to a model, let's go to a model. This is how your model looks like. A schema is how it's called in OpenAPI. This is where the JSON schema definition comes in. So you see it's an object, it's a Marvel character, it has an ID, a name, a first name, and a last name. You define all these properties, you tell it which type is expected, is a string, an integer. You give a nice example if you want that. But this is how you define your API. This is what you do when just writing it manually. But there's also some nice tools around there. Let's see if I can quickly open them up. Stoplight Studio, for example. Give me a second. Is it opening? There we go. So if you're not into writing the spec manually, you can use a GUI for that as well. There are several out there. I will put in some slides next to it. And so here you can see the same thing as I just said, but then in a nicer visual context. So this is a bit more for the ones who don't like to write the textual version. You can still just create anything. I want to create a put, a patch. It just adds it. And as a result, you will get the YAML file just generated for you. Okay. Now let's go back to the slide deck. Now it gets tricky because I have to figure out, is this ChatGPT? Is this, yeah. So just to showcase, let's take a scenario. I want to expand the teams because that's something I'm working on actively. I want to expand that. I want to add a put operation.
Put my laptop there, and you can see your own screen.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Yeah, thank you, Bram.
No, leave it because of HDMI and stuff. Don't want to break it.
It's going to be much easier for me. Okay. Yeah, thank you. So I'm using ChatGPT for that. So I'm asking ChatGPT, can you create a put operation for my team? And then ChatGPT is thinking about it, or GitHub Copilot is thinking about it. Oh, I have to specify it. Can you make an open API for it? Just see. Sure, here we go. So he just knows OpenAPI. He knows the context because it's a structured specification that's well known. So he just generated for me the teams, and just looking at it, he filled in an example. He made a reference to the parameters. He did a request body because it's a put operation. So he pretty much did everything that I just needed to write down. So I'm just gonna copy paste it in. There we go. Now it's a bit, this is a nice thing about YAML. You have to properly indent it, otherwise it will not be happy. One level deeper. There we go. So I can ask ChatGPT to create anything for me. If I just give him an example, curl example, he will also make me an OpenAPI spec. So if you have existing documentation, feed it to to ChatGPT, and he will give you a nicely looking OpenAPI spec. Will it be perfect? Of course not. Will it make your life easier? Hell yeah. Okay. Any questions on this regard already?
Yeah, is there a reason why you prefer YAML over JSON in an editor? Is it just in terms of readability?
I prefer it because you can comment out stuff. That's the only reason why.
Because I hate that whole indent.
Yeah, it can be a pain.
VI or something.
Yeah. So writing OpenAPI specifications, there are plenty of tools. JetBrains has good support. Even if you go in here, I think I'm going to try to close again this chat thing. It has an inline previewer. So if you want to see your code left side, you have a renderer inline. So you can really easily start writing out your specification and look on the result on the right side. Let's see if I can now switch back to PowerPoint again. It does not. Come on. Ah, here we go. So JetBrains has support. VS Code has a very good plugin for OpenAPI. API-Doc is a standalone tool, which is a GUI, which does much more, but I'm just sharing it for afterwards. If you're looking for nice tooling, this is just me sharing my experience. Stoplight Studio, I shared that already. So that's a bit the tools that I suggest when you start writing OpenAPI, that you use them, use ChatGPT. They're there for it makes your life much more easier. But that's just writing the spec. So that's the hard work. That's the most work you have to do pretty much, because all the rest now, you get it out of the box. So the first thing I want to showcase is an API reference. So I wrote the OpenAPI spec. Now I want to make it look nice in an online version or in an online version, in an online version of the specification, because specification is just specified. It's just text. It's not user-friendly. So I'm going to use two tools for that. Let's see if I can do that. Again, I'm going to close a bit of my screens here if things go well. There we go. So let me think. Okay, yeah, Redocly. So Redocly is a tool, CLI tool. You can just install it with an npm package, and it has a nice preview function. If you click on it, you say preview. It will just spin up a server. Let me now try to open it up. Localhost 8080, I think it was. Boom. So my specification that I just created using the put command now already looks 10 times better than just the YAML file. And this is a free. Sorry. Okay, yeah, that's going to be difficult then. Thank you, Matthias. So this is the Redocly. So I added a nice logo on top of that to make it a bit more personalized. You see all the characters, the themes there. You can click open, you can expand, you can even search in it. So this is all just for me, just writing the spec just before, and now you get this as a result. This is already 10 times better than any Word document you send to your customer or to your integrator who wants to integrate with you. This is 10 times better. What is also nice, it shows you examples. You can look at them, see them, how it should behave. So the more info you put in your spec, the richer the documentation will be. The effort will be pretty much the same, but the end goal or the end outcome is a very nice looking documentation. And it took me, yeah, okay, the writing spec will take me a bit more time, but generating this is just to click on a button and you have this. Another example that I want to showcase, if I go to localhost, so all from the same spec, because it is all based on that. You want a Swagger, boom, you got a Swagger output. Nothing spectacular to that. You just have an index page and an HTML. You load your OpenAPI. It's JavaScript based. It just renders it. And the put operation, so this is the real one. If I change it, it will update this. So, okay. If I then have another one that I really like, Scholar. So this looks a bit like Stripe, more or less. They copy pasted it. It's the same OpenAPI definition. It's the same theme. You see the updated Marvel theme. And the nice thing about this one is it even includes code snippets out of the box. So if you're looking for a C#, is that C#? No, let's go for C#. There we go. So if you share this to your customer, and he's a C# developer, he will not harass you anymore. He just will look at your docs and start using them. He will still have questions, but the question will not be the basic one, like how do I do this? How do I do that? What's the properties? He can just use it out of the box. Okay. Okay. So some tools, Redocly, you will hear this name a lot. Open source, very good tooling, very nice look and feel. Some ex-colleagues might recognize the screenshot there. So you can team it. It doesn't cost anything. You can pay for it, and then you get more options. But still, the free version is okay. Swagger, I think that's the most known UI for API documentation. Scalar, I discovered this recently. I like that they have the nice code snippets inside. So that's that. The next step, what you want to do is you want to have a Postman collection, because all these docs are great. You get excited and you want to use it. How do you use it? You want to use curl commands. Curl is okay, but I really like Postman or any other REST client that you're using. But I like Postman because it's been around for so long and it works. It just works. It's not perfect, but it just works. So what can you do? You have an OpenAPI specification. If you want to create a Postman collection, you could do two things. You could just manually start typing over all the stuff. It's not ideal. I don't want that. I want to work smarter, not harder. So let's just import that in Postman. The nice thing about Postman is it has support for OpenAPI. So now it gets really tricky. I have to find the file. Let's see if I can do that. Select files, sites, Marvel, and then my OpenAPI. There we go. You can choose what you want to do with it. You can even manage your OpenAPI in the Postman. So I'm just going to say Postman collection. So already, again, no effort. I just took what I had, my properly worked out OpenAPI definition, specification, and I got this as a result, a Postman collection with pretty much everything in there. Is it perfect? No. There are some things I don't like with the regular import. For example, the ID is not there. If I look at the post request, the body, that's not what I designed. I designed it to have a proper example. I wanted to create one of the Marvel characters. So this is not the perfect way. So I'm going to give you another tool which makes it a bit more better to do that. So again, I'm going to delete this one. There we go. I'm going to stop the preview. I don't need it anymore. Terminate. Close this one. Let's see, Postman. I'm going to share also the Git repository with all these examples in them afterwards. So if you're looking for inspiration or just want to have a Marvel API, it's there for you to use.
Launch Iron Man.
Yeah. Let's see. So one of the packages I built is Portman, and Portman was something I discovered way back, and there was a module that Postman created where you could import the OpenAPI via CLI into Postman. I liked it a lot because it enabled me to do things more easier than just drag and dropping and uploading the file every time. And then I started working on top of that. I started enhancing it and making it better and making it more suited and extending the usage to what I was looking for. The ideal goal would always be, I have an OpenAPI, I want to just give it over and have a perfect Postman collection ready to be used. That was my ideal scenario. So I have a Postman, that's the commando. I have some configuration option, and I can sync it to Postman. That's an option if you share your API key. I'm not going to go into detail, but what it does do is it tweaks some parameters, and just see if I can open it. There's not much more to it. It tweaks some parameters. It takes my original OpenAPI. It will output it to a Postman collection. You can filter some stuff. I don't include test, and I want to sync it. I can even give it a name to which directory it should sync. But so there's nothing spectacular attached to that. But if you recall how the previous import looked, and if you then see how this import will look, you will see that it's way better already. Just going to run it now. Now let's open up Postman. And if things go well, there you have it. You have a Postman collection automatically updated in your Postman collection. So imagine, because Postman has public Postman collection, so you have a workflow, you push a new change to your OpenAPI, it gets pushed to your Postman collection, and ta-da, everybody who's subscribed to your Postman collection, your public one, it has a new version of your Postman collection. How much effort did it take? Nothing. It was one command and it just distributes it. The nice thing about the way I build it is it's the same result, but it has some nice nuances. You have better examples put in place. If you could look at the body, for example, it took the real example code, not just integer string. That's already bad documentation. It took the real example. This Postman collection is now ready to be published, to be distributed to everybody who wants to use my Postman collection. Can I use it already? No, because there is no service. I haven't built any API yet. So that's the next step. Because now you can start tweaking and modeling and you start playing around with it, but there's nothing to play with. You can just look at the docs and see how they behave. Okay, let me switch back to my slides. So Postman tool I can recommend. I think there's another one. I forgot it. It's a purple icon night. No, yeah. Insomnia. Yeah. Insomnia has Postman support, so you could just use that as well. It's just a tool in the end that can read Postman collections, and the CLI that I built is just generating a Postman collection. So you can just manually import them if you want to. So the next stage, so this is the modeling stage where we just talked about. We were always modeling. You had the outcome. If you have a nice documentation, you can see how your result will look like. So you can iterate and model it. So now I want to start validating it. And the first thing I want to do is I want to mock it. I want to play around with it before I hand it over to the development team, because looking at docs and using it, there's still a subtle feeling attached to it. Does it behave as I expect it to behave? Because docs is just, it's not interactive. You just look at it and that's it. So there is a nice tool, it's called Prism. And Prism allows you to just take your OpenAPI and it spins up a mocking server for you. So I'm going to do that as well, just to showcase it. Okay, I'm going to close this one again. Here's mock Prism. So it's again just a simple module. You can decide if you want to have the static mock or dynamic mock. Dynamic means it will just lorem ipsum all the values. Static mock means it uses all your examples that you put in. So the more examples you put in your documentation, the better, the more realistic your mocking will also be. I'm going to run it. So what it will do, it will provide all the endpoints. It provides an end server, and it's listening for changes. So if I now go to this, let's see which curl command or which URL it's using behind the scene, localhost 3004. That should be okay. Oh, wait, I have to kill another service because they're using the same. Give me 1 second. I have to stop this one. That's my actual web server. And restart this one. Okay. Let's make the preview look a bit nicer. So you see, it's making an actual request. I get an actual result. I can do a put operation. It behaves like a real one. The only difference is it's just a playground. It doesn't save the information. So if I create 10 times Rocket Raccoon and I do a fetch of that ID, it won't exist. It will always return the same ID. But still, it will give me a feeling. You can use this maybe for testing purposes. If you're building a front end and you want a backend server for front end usage, you have now a web server up and running that behaves like the specification does. And while your development team is then building out the API, your front end guy or girl can already start building out the integration aspect of React or Angular or whatever you're using. So that's already a win. I consider that. Okay, so that's Prism. Let's go back to the slide deck. So that's Prism. Here we go. Public, open source, you can just download it. And I know a lot of big companies are using this behind the scenes as a sandbox tool. So if you want to use their tool, they don't have a server up and running. They just offer you the Prism version of their software. Is it perfect? No, but will it get you started? Yes. Another tool I can recommend is JSON Server. It's not behaving as an open API specification, but allows you to really easily model your JSON objects, and it just spins up a REST server with pagination and everything. So you can easily use that and even hack it a bit to make it a more realistic mocking server. This one can store your commits or your change that you push to it. Okay. The next step of your validation effort is you want to make sure your specification is valid, because if other tools are depending on them, you want to make sure that it meets the requirements, that the linting and everything is put in place as expected. For this one, there's also tools for that. Oh, wait. So this is the next step. Before I publish my OpenAPI, I want to make sure it's valid, and I want to clean it up, because now it's a working document. I don't want to expose that I'm still working on themes. I want to only expose that characters, the endpoints, that these are stable. These are the ones that my internal or external users should be using. So I want to do this. I want to take my original spec, and I want to make a public version in JSON, because Bram likes JSON, and another version for YAML, because Matthias, I know, is a big fan of YAML. That Matthias. So, okay.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah. I'm gonna stop my mock server and start my regular server, otherwise I forget it. There we go. Okay. So validate. Again, there are some tools I can recommend. Spectral from Stoplight is one of them. Redocly, again, is another one. And then an example validator, let's just check your examples. So I'm going to start now just running them one by one so you can see the difference. So here you see my spec, my original spec has 1 error and 3 warnings, and you can define what you consider valid. So you can tweak them very strict, or you can say it's very loose. And in this case, I didn't do much. I just took the regular default requirements or the specification that it needed. And I'll just skim briefly through them. It says every operation must have a unique operation ID. Okay, that's good. That makes sense. I see there's one that has get characters that's not properly, it comes in dual. It should have a license field. That's more a warning, because a license field is interesting if you're using their spec. The server URL is not best not to point to example.com or localhost, because it's going to be public documentation. You don't want to point to localhost. It advises you to at least have 1 4xx response. That's best practice. You want to share not only the success, but also share some non-successful response. How they look like. So I can quickly now correct this. Let's see. Get characters was the error. So let's quickly do that. Get characters. So I have it 3 times. Once. It's character. Here. And teams, there was a typo. So it should be get teams. There we go. I save it. I rerun it, and let's see if it's now already valid. Yay, it's valid. I got 3 warnings. The warnings aside, that's good. And now I'm going to showcase a stricter one. That's going to be the spectral one. This is the one that has the most advanced options. There are linting sets from major brands like Adidas who share their linting sets. You can extend linting sets. It's an ecosystem on its own, and it really helps you if you have a huge API repository of APIs to manage them on a central level, that they all look and behave the same. I'm just going to run it here, because this one is to see if this is also better. Oh, I took the wrong one. Sorry, it should be this. So this one also complains about my info. It doesn't have a license. It should be a URL. It also spotted there is an example that's not properly. So one of the examples should be an integer. Oh, nice. It also checks my examples. Great. And another one is it expects it to must be an array while it's not. So it even tells me which example is incorrect. So this one is the schema, the Marvel model property ID, and the other one is my character's example. So this one really saves your ass, because this will help you make your documentation better. And again, it's just a tool you install, not much more work to do it. Let's see. Get characters, I think that was the issue of ID or something. Let's quickly fix that as well. Schemas. Team. Properties. ID. Okay, it's an integer, and my example was ABC. That's not correct, of course. So I'm going to correct that. That's that. And then the other one, I did that on purpose, so I can should be able to quickly find that as well. Character responses, properties, characters in my example set. Okay, here you see the examples is an object, but expects it just to be an array in YAML. So I'm going to remove that and indent it again. Otherwise, YAML will not be happy. That should be okay. Now let's see if I rerun it, if it's valid. Again, all problems are solved. So you see the difference between which tool you're using. One was a bit more stricter. It didn't catch the example ones. The second one was strict and spotted the example one. So now my documentation is valid. It should be looking good. Is it complete? Of course not. You should always add as much detail as possible, write a description, provide an example. If there is a default, provide a default. If it's required, make it required. If there's not allowed to have additional properties, make it really as it should be. So the looser your documentation, the looser the outcome will be, and the more open and more flexible or worse the result will be from your situation. The last thing I want to showcase is that this is about the validation part. I want to publish it to make it ready for publication. And there's also a small repo for that. So I have my original YAML file and I want to generate a JSON in a YAML format. And I want to make sure that it only includes the allowed operations because it's a working document. There are elements in there I don't want exposed to the outside world because we're working on that. It's not yet ready for public. So I'm using OpenAPI format for that. That's also one of my tools that I built. And it allows you to filter out properties, tags. You can specify what you want, and then it will take it out. So in my case, I tagged all the items that I don't want in my end result. Let's see if I have it. I put in an exclude property. So all paths that have exclude means I don't want them to be included. I just want all the rest, but not the exclude. If I close this one, I don't need that anymore. If I now just publish my OpenAPI doc, there we go. It just generated 2 files in here. And if I open up one, I'm gonna try to make it a bit more visible and see if I can collapse them. It only includes characters, and team ID, but all the other ones are stripped out. So it gives me clean OpenAPI documentation. So again, I don't have to maintain 5 versions of one file. You just put in some tags, and the result is you can start filtering out which elements you want to keep and which elements you want to take out of it. Okay, any questions? Is everybody still okay with it? If it's not interesting, just tell me and I skip to the interesting stuff. There isn't more interesting stuff here. I'm building up, Bram. I'm building up.
Maybe it's further down the presentation.
Okay.
If it's later on, then you just say, are there ways to like say which you do want? Like, suppose you want A. So you define your API spec, and at the end you generate some documentation. Is there a way to say I want this part published and this part not published, for example?
Yeah, that's what I just showcased. So yeah, you can do the inverse. Say I want to keep everything except this, or I want to only show this. So it goes in both directions. And if I look at the configuration of this, it's really stupid, but where is it here? Here you can define, okay, I want to exclude the flags, exclude. I want to start stripping out unused schemas, properties, parameters. So all the items that are not used, they're dropped from the end result. And you can also strip the exclude tags itself also from the end result. So you get a slimmed down, cleaned up version, and it even does sorting. So for example, if you're a bit autistic like myself or OCD kind of, and you don't like that the A and Z are next to each other, it will also sort them so they're nicely structured so that it's. So
you can exclude parameters, but can you also exclude certain paths not to be published?
Yeah, that's what I did. I stripped all the incomplete paths that I don't want to publish. I just added a tag to it, and it just scratches it from the end result. Okay.
Is it also possible to have multiple flags, not per se if you have multiple all stripped, but let's say you want to filter ones, but if those one with filtered exclude, for example, and was another one with a different.
Yeah. Then it would be two commands, one that does the exclude operation and you output it to this folder of these files, and then the other one would dump into another file. So that's the config part. If I go here, here you find the output, and this, no, is this the right one? Yeah, this is the right one. So here you find the output. Wait, let me quickly go to the package.json. There, I think it's properly shown. So here you tell, this is the input, the OpenAPI, my original one. I want to output it to YAML or JSON, and I want to use this filter capability. And the filter capability defines what you want to get filtered out or kept in as a result.
Can you also do tag based, like have tag
Yeah.
internal, external, and have different values?
Yeah, the problem is tags are also used in OpenAPI as a grouping mechanism. So if you're using tags, you can say, I don't want to include everything that's tagged as themes, but then it strips out everything. While if you use X exclude or X is called extensions, OpenAPI extensions, you can just do whatever, as long as you start with an X and a dash, then you can say, I want to version, you can even version it. If you say this one belongs to version 1, this one belongs to version 2, and then you filter on, I only want to keep version 1, it will keep only version 1. So there's a value-based filtering mechanism, there's a tag-based filtering mechanism, there's a flag-based filtering mechanism. So no matter where you want to do it and in which format you want to shape it, you can filter in both directions.
Would that be your recommendation, the actual version of it? Or would you create separate OpenAPI specs?
It depends how far away they drift from each other. If there's an evolution, meaning your base will remain the same, but you add stuff, then I would keep it in one document. But if the version 2 is completely different than version 1, I would not mix them and keep them separately. It will make your life easier just to maintaining the OpenAPI YAML. Okay. All good still? Okay.
How does this work with feature flag? So here it is scripting out and it's not part of the spec, but what if you just want to have like a flag you want to hit, that the API is ready, but also the API spec already is still ready to say possible?
So you mean that the API itself doesn't have it yet?
So the API has it. There's a feature flag that you can enable without doing deployment. But since you script it out, the API spec, it sounds like you always need a deployment for it.
Yeah, that's the fact, because you have to decide what you want to showcase in your documentation. So if you want to include a feature toggle, that you can label them, for example, as preview or coming soon, but then you expose them to everybody.
Yep.
So depending on who you expose it to, if it's everybody has access to the same version of your specs, your documentation, you have to include it. But then you can add some context to your documentation. There are options to add labels to it as well, and then you can say preview, or I do this or I do that with it.
Yep.
But feature toggle, you also have to decide you want to show it to everybody or you don't want to show it. And if it's shown, then you can use it. If it's not shown, it doesn't exist officially. Okay. Next stage. It's I have to be a bit cautious of my time, but I'm trying to rush through it. Spectral, great tool. I recommend it if you're doing that. Redocly, excellent tool. Multi-facets, multiple use cases. OpenAPI format, that's what I built. Proud of that. It has 20,000 weekly downloads, so it's being used a lot apparently. I was still surprised by that, but yeah, that's that. The next step is about publishing all the documentation. So that's the document step. That's I see my mouse, yeah. So you did all the cycles. I think now it's ready. Let's publish it. Here there is no magic solution, magic tool, but there are a lot of tools you can just use out of the box. But what you typically want to do, you want to expose all of it to your user base. You want to have the API reference, you want to have the Postman collection, you want to have the OpenAPI spec, YAML and JSON files, because they might be using it for their own SDKs. At API Deck, for example, we didn't have the Java SDK, but we just gave them the OpenAPI spec. We pointed them to a generator, and they built their own API, the Java SDK from that. Because we had the specification there, you can just use it and share it with everybody. What I did is I just made a very simple web page, but just to showcase how simple things can be. Here we go. This is my landing page. It's already beginning. It's better than most big companies have. It points to, where's my mouse? It points to the Redocly version, the Swagger version. Here you can download it. You can download the Postman collection. You can download the Postman environment file. So that's already a great landing point, because any customer, any support engineer who has a question about API, just point them to that page. A single page is more than enough already. So again, small effort, huge impact, low value, low effort to maintain. When we talk about tooling, about developer portals, come on, one more, here we go. Yeah. Redocly, they also have a developer portal solution. This is a SaaS hosted combination, readme.com. It's been used a lot, not the best, but it works quite well. MKDocs, open source, themable, stable as a rock. Stoplight, a SaaS version of it. Postman, they also have the documentation. I don't like it because it behaves quirky. So, but then just sharing it, that you even have it built in Postman itself. Now we go into the rest of the part. We're almost at the end, but now I think this is the most interesting part, the build part and the test part. So we've just finished the designing and the publishing of the documentation. That's great. So now let's start using our API spec. So I see again 2 ways to handle it. You give it to your team. It's defined. Everything is in the spec. They know what to do. They know which properties they expect. They know which headers they should provide. The query parameters. I think this is the best user story you can get from your PM, if you have a good PM at least. The other option is you can also just generate it from the OpenAPI spec. And I know that a team at Celgent, they were using that to generate a C# backend out of the box from the OpenAPI spec. So let's see if I can go to that website. How does it work? Can I click it? No. It can click it, but then it opens up Safari. Let's give it a go. So you have generators. This is open, again, an open API, an open source tool. You have client generators, and you have, if not mistaken, server generators. And this is all the technology stack that they support out of the box. Go, Java, several flavors of Java, Kotlin, PHP, Laravel, Lumen, Symfony, Python, Ruby on Rails, Scala, Spring. So without having to write any code, I'm not sure if it all will work. But the fact that there is such a huge library of backends, it must be something that's being used. So you can just generate your backend. So even again, this will just give you very simple CRUD-based OpenAPI backends, but it can already help you with some modeling or stuff like you want to do or experiment with it. So that's one way to approach it. In my case, I just built a small Node.js application that runs as a web application, just for the demo sake of the purpose with an SQLite. So let's see, that's that. So this part will always be the same. It's build or generate, it's up to you. There is no proper tool around it. There's no easy win, but that's, again, if you're building APIs, this should be the nice thing to do, not just writing all the documentation.
But it gives you a skeleton for
yeah.
So if you say, well, I want to do this in a certain framework,
you can
Go or something like that, you already have a skeleton.
Yeah.
You know, these are all the functions you need to build, endpoints, and so on. And, yeah.
And I know that the OpenAPI or the OpenAPI server generator has a templating language attached to it. It's Mustache, so you can tweak even the output of what's being generated. But the fact that you have a model defined, that entity should be resembling what you're going to build in whatever framework you're going to use. So, okay, now we come to the part where I'm always very excited about. It's the contract testing. Because what happens, you've built your API, you've built your documentation, great, but how do you make sure that your API and your docs are in line or in sync? Because that's the risk. If they start drifting, you then again get all the mails, all the questions are going around. So what we did, or what I did together with the team, is we start looking at, okay, Postman is a great tool. You can use it to test it easily. Let's see if we can do more with it. OpenAPI has all the knowledge. It has all the requirements. So what if you can combine them? What if based on OpenAPI, you could generate tests out of it, out of the box, without writing any test code yourself? You would still need to write your unit tests for the backend and everything you're building. That's not the purpose of contract testing. Contract testing is what's been documented is matching with the API and vice versa. So I'm gonna try to showcase that now. Here we go. It's always a bit, let's close some things. There we go. Is it still relevant or just tell me, and if not, okay.
Said it was going to get interesting.
Yeah, but I find it interesting, but maybe it's not for everybody. What I'm using here is I'm going to use Portman, so the tool that I built together with somebody else, and Newman as the CLI runner. That's a CLI extension on Postman. But I'm just going to start very straightforward. I'm just going to take the default Portman. I'm just going to say, take my Open API, make a Marvel Postman collection out of it, and sync it to Postman. By default, it will inject tests. So I'm not configuring anything. I'm just saying, take my Open API, generate me a Postman collection, and just, if you can, try to inject tests with it out of the box. I'm going to try to do that now. So I'm just going to run it. Nothing configured. Hopefully everything works as expected. Give it a second. There we go. So it updated my existing Postman collection that was already there. And if you go to characters and I click on characters, you will see one thing. It has tests. And it has tests for a lot of things. It will check if the value is 200. It will check if the content type is application.json. It will check if the response body is actually JSON. It will check the schema, meaning that the properties that are returned, are they matching with the properties that I defined in my model? So is a string actually a string? Is the name that I put in the property, is it a name? And then it will check that. So let's see if that does what it's supposed to do. Oh, I need to stop something and restart something. Oh no, I need to, wait, give me 1 second. I need to change the URL because the URL is incorrect. It's still pointing at the mock server and the mock server is not there anymore. So I'm going to quickly do that now. API, there we go. I'm going to just rerun it. So I'm not touching anything in Postman. I'm not touching a lot in OpenAPI. I'm just updating one thing. It's refreshed. I will close this one because it keeps it open in memory somehow. And now go back. The base URL. It should, oh no, it should say API. It didn't. So let me, oh. That's the actual value API. There we go. Is that correct? Yeah, it should be. So now it's hitting my actual endpoint, my local web server. And without writing any tests, you get 4 tests checked for you out of the box. And it doesn't do it for one endpoint, it does it for all. So it just reads the Open API, injects all the tests for you, and then it just works. So if you run this at scale using a CLI, you have now contract testing at scale. So no QA guy has to write anything. He just has to configure it once, make sure it's up to date with your Open API, and it works. That's the nice thing. And you have multiple things by default. It just does 4 things. It checks the if the code is 200, if the content type matches, if the response body is JSON. So if I now take a more experimental one, let's see how this one would behave. Not sure if it will work, but let's see. Okay, here it says something is missing. It shouldn't have data, no additional properties. So this means this JSON schema, it expects a value or key that's not in there. So here, I know I did it on purpose because it's not name, it should be title. I've defined that it should be the title key. So it detects, so if your engineer, whoever built backend, made the field name, while the specification says title, they're already out of sync. And it will tell you that. And the test will stop you and say something is wrong, you can correct that. So I quickly will correct that. This is my, here it is. Teams. Team model. Name. I did something wrong somewhere. I'm a bit lost now. Here, this should be name. So the backend returns name, while the spec says its titles. That's not correct. So if I now rerun my Portman command, and now go back to Postman. Give it a second. It's now just re-uploaded the changes. I'm gonna close it quickly again. I go to Teams, get Marvel team. Now it's all valid. So you see how simple it was? This is very simple. You maintain one thing, your open API, and all the rest will just follow along and keep it in sync. So from a user perspective, it means your docs are matching with the API response. From an API development perspective, it means your spec and your API code is behaving as expected. So that's nice. Okay.
So this is basically like the open API equivalent of like do what you say and say what you do.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And I didn't do anything. I just hooked it up. I wrote the open API spec, but I didn't have to write any manual tests. It just comes out of the box.
Is it possible to, for example, if you have an endpoint that contains a string, it has to be a certain length, certain
Yeah.
amount to focus, how that can be?
Yeah. Yeah. So
You repeat the question.
So the question is, can you do content tests? Because in your case, you want to check if the response, whichever property you're looking for, has a certain value, has a certain length, or as this kind of thing. So I'm going to just showcase the examples because they're properly documented. It's called a content test. And in a content test, let's see, I think it's this one, Portman. So here you define what you want to test on. So you want to test the response body. Let me see. Yeah. So in this case, you're checking if the first value of your response, the key company name should match with SpaceX. The second one should be Musk. And you can go all the way in. You can even check if the description has 9 characters long. You can say it has a minimum or a maximum length. If it's an array, it will count the number of array items. So if you say, I want to check the array of items, it only has to return 3 properties or 3 objects. It will check that as well. So you have all these options here. You can also check if it doesn't exist because there shouldn't be a value. You can check that as well. So you have the empty state checks, and you can even use the normal Postman validation. So you can go very broad in the testing spectrum. But this you have to define because this OpenAPI cannot generate by itself. But what OpenAPI can generate is what we call fuzzy testing. And fuzzy testing is you're going to check if it behaves in a non-successful situation. So in this case, I defined a couple of properties that were required. So I'm going to check if my API, if they're not there, what will do? It should return a 400, for example. So I'm going to also demonstrate that quickly. I'm going to do one thing first. I'm going to copy my final OpenAPI because it has much more data. Just to showcase, I don't do much. It just does it for all properties there. Huh? So I'm going to copy paste it in. That's the final version. So if I collapse this, you will see it has more paths. It has characters, themes, and movies. So it's extended already. And now I'm going to do the contract testing. I'm just going to first generate it. Which one was I using? The first one. There we go. Movies, it just appears and it just gets test injected. All the same. So the more endpoints, it just does it automatically. Now I'm going to showcase quickly the fuzzy testing. That's another command. Oh, yeah, by the way, if you want to run this from a CLI perspective, now I open up Postman. That feels a bit cumbersome, and maybe you want to do that in pipeline. You can do the same thing. I'm curious what will happen. So it does all the tests for me in one go. It hits all the endpoints. And at the end result, you will see it did 45 assertions. That means I checked for 54 individual elements that tested on them. It was 15 test scripts, and they all succeeded. Great, you can automate this at scale. So every time you change something, your test suite grows with you, but nobody's writing the test. It does it automatically. Now I'm going to do the other one, the fuzzy testing. There, the fuzzy. Okay, so it takes a lot of things. The fuzzy testing, I have configured it. Let me quickly open up that first. Fuzzy, there we go. So the way it's organized, the test suite, I'm actually skipping a lot of steps now for this situation because initially I didn't do anything. This is the more advanced configuration, so I don't want to spend too much time on it now, and maybe afterwards if you're interested. I'll skim through them. You can override properties because sometimes you want to add something, you want to make it a name that's generated by a variable, so you can override items. You can assign variables, meaning that if the response from request X, I want to use that in response to the next one, you can assign as a variable and it's being used in the next. So you can create flows within your API system. And then you can also inject variation test. And variation test, that's the thing that I like to showcase here, is I want to check if my characters, they should return a 4222 on an invalid request, and because I want to check if there's required fields, minimum number of fields, or maximum length, these kind of properties, if they are defined in OpenAPI, generate me a request for that checks if that's respected properly. So let's see how that one does. I already did it, so it should be here. Postman. So I gave it a new name just for clarity's sake, but then again, so here you see again all my tests, all my original tests are there. Test the one you saw before, and it created a variation test folder. Here it will do three things in this case. It will check when creating a Marvel character if the required field, not sure if you can read it. It will check if the required field, if it's not present, it should return a 422. And the other ones will check if it's a bad request because the limit is not a valid limit. Again, I didn't instruct it to do. It took the OpenAPI specification. I just say, generate me these tests 422, but I didn't define specific case by case. I just say generic. I want to check on required field, minimum length fields, and generate me the test. And that's what it does. So if you will see now the body will not have a name. So if I run the test, it says all successful, but it checked if the error was there. So it generated the unhappy path of the situation. If I go to this one, it should return a 400. Great, all tests succeed by design. Okay, yeah.
Can you also check how the response is not only 400, but that the message is
the
message you expected?
That's the content check then. It doesn't do that automatically. You have to then define, I expect that this response has to have this, but you extend the test suite at that moment. So you start with the basics, which is automatically injected, and then you can elaborate a bit more. I want to be more specific. You can do that if you want to. Okay. The nice thing about using this kind of flow is you can have CRUD flows. So if I would run this continuously, it will check one after the other, and it will just see if I can run the scenario here. So if I would say run, it now scans all the elements and it will tell me that, is it still busy? I'm not sure. All tests passed, 66. So you can run this at scale all the time. And as soon as something changes, your test suites get automatically updated. You run all the tests again, and you're always in sync. And if not, if there's an error, you know something is off. Your OpenAPI is off, or your API itself is off. Okay. Another advantage is that you get with using these kind of tools, you get also the option to have test results in a public report. So you can see, okay, I did 5 iterations, means it does 5 cycles. How many you want to do with Newman or Portman, you can define that. And then you can see for each of the test suite, okay, the first one iteration, what's the input, what's the output. You can get all the details from your test result as well. Okay. So that's a bit the part about contract testing. I skimmed over it very briefly, but there is a whole world of possibilities you can use in that regard. But again, my purpose here is to explain if you have good documentation written in a specification, the rest comes out of the box pretty much for free or with low effort at least. I'm using Portman and I'm using Newman, all public usable tools in combination with Postman. You don't have to buy a license even if you want to. You can just run it locally or in the pipeline. There's no cost involved. You're just using local files generated and running them locally using a CLI tool. I can even take it a step further, performance testing, because that's the next thing you want to check. You want to check how many requests can my API handle in that regard. So the previous session or the previous test suite was checking, does it match with what I had documented? Now I want to check how does it behave at scale. And K6 is a tool that I'm very much in favor of or a proponent of, because it's a Go-based utility, but you write your test in JavaScript syntax. So you can easily just write a normal GET request, HTTP request, GET, and then you define the URL. So I was using that a long time ago when we did performance tests for Bram, but it felt like we should be able to automate this, because we have a Postman collection where we do all the requests. So now I have to copy paste and manually rewrite them in K6 or in Gatling or whatever performance test you're using. So then I ran into the repository. It's called Postman to K6, and I started testing it. There was some gaps, but we patched the gaps, and I was able to automate that part as well. So we have a working Postman collection. You can automatically convert it into a K6 and run that for performance testing. I'm going to showcase that also. So I have a K6 folder. So what it does is it converts Postman to K6. That's the first step you'll see here. Again, it takes my Postman, my OpenAPI spec, converts it in a Postman. That Postman gets converted into K6, and then you can run it. So that's what happens in this step here. I'm going to run it. So here you see it generates my Postman collection. I'm not sure if it will sync it. I think it does. Okay, let's quickly see what it did. So now we have here a K6 Postman collection, again, with whatever test you have defined for K6. In this case, I don't want to contract test, because performance testing is not about the response content, it's about how fast can it respond, and is it within boundaries. That's what performance testing is about. You don't want to do at scale content tests or anything. That's not the use case for performance testing. But it generated the whole flow. If I would run the flow, see if I can run it, it should all be green. Where is it? Run. Where is why is it not showing up in here? Overview maybe. No, okay. I'm just going to showcase one then maybe. Just it returns a 400, 200. It's successful. I think I did some tweaking with the content body, response bodies. Yeah, I added the GUID to it. So I injected the GUID so that each time it gets injected, it automatically has a unique name, because that's a requirement. But I also clean it up. So meaning that whatever's created in step 1 in the post is being reused as a variable in the get, the put, and the delete. So I get all the items, performance check that, create items at scale, and every time a new item gets created, I check it if the get response, I do the update, and then delete that item again. So I have at the end, I have maybe 1,000 items created, but they also cleaned up again. So I have this, I'm not dirtying my database as a result. I also have a clean result state, more or less. Okay, and now let's see how it behaves when I run my K6 test again. Let's see, I think I should just use this one. So this is K6. It's just a small thing. Here you can see which endpoints it hit, what the result was of that endpoint. They all resulted with 200. You can see some metrics. Okay, I checked all these items. They all succeeded. I can see some delays, some response time, the P95, P90. That's interesting. But I want to do a bit more, because that's only one run. I want to run it at scale. Okay, that's a nice thing about K6. You can just run it at scale. But again, I haven't written any K6 test. It just gets generated. I will showcase that also quickly. Where is it? I think it's in here. Yeah. So this is generated from my Postman collection. So all this code it just spits it out and it's just ready to be used. Now I'm going to use it. Let's take this one. Is it this one? Let me check. Yeah. So this one is a bit heavier test. I'm going to run for 30 seconds, and I'm trying to aim for 50 requests per second. So you can instruct K6 to simulate that kind of behavior. So it will run a longer period of time. You can see here how it's behaving. So you see here, it spins up 50 virtual users. So it behaves like 50 users are visiting all at the same time an API. And it will try to do that for 30 seconds long. So I'm doing a small spike test. But it's not intense, of course, for the server. It's just to see how it behaves on load and if there's any errors. And the point I'm trying to make is that, again, low effort, high output, you get it out of the box, and you get really nice reporting as well, because your CTO, remember what I told you in the beginning, he was asking how fast can we go, how many requests can we handle, and you get this kind of reports out of the box available. So it will showcase how many tests, how many failed. In this case, I think this is not the right report, I'm not sure, but I had some reports here already. So this one is from 8:45. I'm not sure if this is the right one. I think I'm running the wrong. Let's see if I have another one. Here you go. So you also have this nice built-in reporting capability. So you can see the graphs, the duration, the P95. You can have all this wealth of information that you can now share. I was aiming for 50 requests per second. I was able to get that. There were no errors, which means my API, I can make an SLA on top of that and say my API is able to do that. So you have all this kind of information that you can now share. And another advantage is that, let's see, I'm in Chrome 10. You also can link it to Grafana. Oh, wait. If I refresh it, hopefully it will come back. Grafana is a time series database, so you can also collect all the information over time. Did I run it to Grafana? That's the question. I didn't. So I'm quickly going to do that while we sit here. And then I'm going to start wrapping up my demo. Where is it? Here, I need to run it at the influx. That's the influx one. So now it's running the data. I'm generating the traffic locally, but it will start sending out the outcome to my Grafana instance. And here you can see already the results are dripping in. I'm going to give it a couple of seconds to finish, but then you get much more detailed information, and you can display that dashboard on your systems, see how it behaves, and you can start monitoring across releases. How is your API behaving? Is it going better or worse because of a code change you introduced? So that's what you did. And if I zoom out, and let's maybe take the last 24 hours, you can see there was some spikes going on. If I zoom in and zoom a bit more even, and then zoom in a bit more even, you can get all this information. All the numbers, all the details that you might be looking for to give to your CTO or for yourself, because now you know that your API is behaving as documented and is able to handle a certain amount of load. So you should be okay to get this in production and running smooth. Okay.
That's a quick question. The dashboard itself also generated, or?
No, these are public dashboards.
Sorry?
These are public dashboards. You can just download them from Grafana and just use them. I think I tweaked a couple of them to make some because I have two dashboards pretty much. I think this one, it shows, for example, which endpoint was the slowest. That's what I did. But you see here, 5 seconds. That's bad in comparison with milliseconds, but it's not failing. It's still 100% successful. So it means it was able to handle the load, but it never crashed. It went a bit slower. But this could be an indication saying that this endpoint, I need to explore that because something is off in the code. But again, I didn't write in performance test. I just created the open API spec. And I think now we go to the last part of the presentation, Q6. Highly recommend that, but whatever tool you want to use, you can use it. I'm not sure if they all support open API, but hey, just sharing it. JMeter is also a very known performance testing tool. I talked about the testing cycle, I talked about the building cycle, now talking about the evaluation cycle. The reporting is very important because without that, you're flying blind. All the tools that I showcased, they all have integration options. They offer JUnit exports. So if you have an Azure pipeline, you can see your tests at cycles and pipelines running at scale. You have this dashboard, which makes it very nice to go back in time after release, how they behave. One more thing I quickly want to showcase, generating an SDK. There are a lot of options. I'm not going to dive in. I have prepared an example, thanks to Michael, to have a PHP example, but you have the SDK generator that I showcased before. Sorry, I'm skipping a bit. So the OpenAPI generator.tech, it's an open source version. It has a lot of SDK support. It also has limitations. So I'm not the biggest proponent of the SDK generated by that, but at API, we used it at scale, and it gave nice results, but it had more maintenance attached to that. A new one that's popping up is one from Microsoft, and they look very promising. Open source again. They have .NET, they have Go, you have Java, PHP, Python, and Ruby. I tried the PHP one, it worked flawless. So I got a nice PHP package generated. I can connect to my SDK. I can connect to my API. So if you want to offer SDKs, don't start building them yourself. Maybe you can just leverage the generated version. If you want to go for a more fancy one, Build with Fern is a platform that you have to pay for, but it has very good generated SDK. They handle a lot of complexity behind the scenes for you. Another one is Speakeasy, also a much recommended. They just have pipelines. You attach your OpenAPI and you get all the APIs, the SDK that you want out of the box generated for you. Now we're entering the last part of the cycle. That's the support and observe. Nothing to show here, but some screenshots. So typically you want to automate everything that I showed before. I build it up manually locally, but you can run this at scale. I showed you the Newman reports. I showed you pretty much everything. So the goal would be you have your OpenAPI, you validate your OpenAPI, you build your API manually or automated. Then you publish all the documentation, you run the tests. So I did a small setup in Delta Blue. So here we go. So this is my setup. You see the Grafana and my API instance. So they support scenarios. I think that's what they call also in GitHub pipelines or and an Azure DevOps pipeline. So I have this deploy Marvel API, which it checks out my code, it runs npm install, it starts a supervisor process for my Node.js, and then it starts doing the publication of OpenAPI, publication of Postman, running contract tests, running performance tests, and running a spike test. So I'm just going to run it. And the outcome will be that on the public documentation, after 30 seconds, you will see all the updated results just working as expected. So I can now deploy with confidence without writing all the tests, my API, and make sure that it's publicly available. I think if you want, we can wait for it, but it will take at least 30 seconds. But you see, it's not just fake, it's happening, and the API is being used. And I think if we go back to stats, you can see that the performance test, I was running the performance test against production. You can see that I was already using some bandwidth, had some memory use impact, but the impact was very low at this stage. So I'm curious what will happen in 30 seconds, if it will go up or down. But that's also what's linked to observability. You need to have an API, but you also need to monitor it, watch it closely, because that's also part of the developer experience. If your API is working locally fine, it works on my machine, but your user is frustrated by it, you need to know that and act upon it, because that's part of the DX experience you want to give him or her. Let's see if it's finished in the meantime. No, it's running the contract tests. So I'll come back maybe after the session. Wait, PowerPoint again. So this is the scenario I showcased. In Azure, you can do pretty much the same. In GitHub, you can do pretty much the same. Use the pipeline, use the automation for it. Here you see another example from Selligent, where they do a lot of steps and they have all the output that they need to guard their quality. In AWS, you should be monitoring your dashboards. In Azure, you should be monitoring your error responses, because they might not pop up in the performance test and contract test, but they might appear in the wild. It's like a Pokemon, you got to catch them all. Then I come to the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed a bit about unlocking the power of spec-driven development. I showcased the diagram. It's a concept. It's more a capstock. I'm not sure what's the coat hanger kind of concept, where I really try to work around and use that as a vision kind of thing. But the outcome this is what is the value. One open API, all these benefits that you get from it. I'm not going to ramble over it, but I think it's pretty clear. I hope it's clear right now, all the benefits that I showcased in the beginning, that I was able to showcase them during the demos. So, and that leads me to thank you all for your attention and your patience.
So, wow, Tim, what a presentation, man. That took a lot of time to prepare, I guess.
Yeah, but
CNR, that was
not good. No, I will talk to Tony about that.
Probably something wrong in the APIs which you haven't.
No, yeah.
Watching your Dagger presentation, I'm just wondering why weren't we doing this with Delta Blue from the beginning?
It evolved.
You were there, by the way.
Yeah, but it evolved.
So thank you very much, man. It's really appreciated. In the past, what I saw is that when we did meetups, at the end of this presentation, we also did something like a raffle, something that you gave away from a sponsor or whatever. So I've got these five vouchers, Nico. Yeah. So these are vouchers you can use to play on Delta Blue Cloud for free. Well, unless your voucher is empty. So, and therefore you need to find a way how to share them. So usually what we do is like the speaker, and I know this is not prepared, so this is a little bit stressful. But usually we do something like you give a question, who pays attention,
okay.
And the one who has it right gets it.
So you wouldn't have won one because I talked about the filtering and you forgot that already. So
yeah, true. But I don't need a voucher, so that's
no.
okay for me.
Okay. Maybe the first question is, what was the most famous name before it became Open API?
Swagger.
Okay. Yeah, Bram, this should it become more difficult or not?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, but then the second question would be.
I think that was too easy. This one of the two that I had. So
yeah, okay. What company started the Open API or the spec-driven design concept? There was a company.
Remember that. Okay, that's too hard then.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, then maybe that's another question. Who can name me the
answer is an example, but there were multiple ones.
Yeah.
So who saw an alternative of Open API? It was on one of the logos in the beginning.
Oh,
Waddle.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, this is for you. Here you get to know Delta Blue Cloud.
Never inside joke.
Okay, still 4 left. Able to do.
Yeah, which is the performance test tool that I really like? Yeah.
The first one? Yeah.
Give it to someone else. Already.
Yeah, true.
So
it's going to be difficult then. Who's not a customer? Maybe that's the question.
maybe that's a filter. Like,
yeah.
Okay. It's difficult, huh?
Yeah, I don't know at the moment actually. Let me quickly.
For which company is Tim working currently? You were the first time. Which one was his previous company?
It's difficult to keep track, I guess.
Huh?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, okay, Jonas, but you were the first one. I mean,
You can share this so many once.
What's the name of the mock server that I showcased? Yeah, it's a good one.
Right.
Okay, they were paying attention, Bram. I'm impressed. I know another one then. Which tool was used the most in all of the tooling that I showcased today? There's not a tool that came up in various topics. Postman is sorry? Yeah, that's the one. Good. How many more, Bram? Yeah. Which is the most famous API explorer out there? The reference, the documentation tool.
Yeah, you don't need a voucher.
Nobody? Yeah, it's Swagger, huh? The Swagger HTML, that's the most famous. So, okay. Bram, how much more do you want me to figure?
One, so I can also put it in and see who's the fastest to get it.
See if I. Nice. Yeah, maybe then which dashboard utility I use to display my K6 performance test? Yeah, okay. I think then Gilles can get one.
Which
One
deal?
with the glasses.
There you
There are multiple with glasses, but
Right, I'm not a fortune.
yeah, that's good.
Always the issue. Yeah, why, what failed?
Yeah, I will have a quick look. I think it's because my seeding or something went wrong.
The last thing. Contract test. failed.
Yeah, I think it's because of the seeding. I have to figure out, but sometimes.
I mean, this is nice. I mean, your pipeline fails.
Yeah.
See what the problem is.
Yeah.
Fix it and run it again.
Yeah, you see, before it worked perfectly fine, and then something changed. It might be me, it might be the system. I'm pretty sure if I reset the database and run it again, it will link. Let's see.
Thank you very much, Tim.
You're welcome.
How are you feeling?
Tired. Thank you. Okay.
All right, let's have some drinks.
Yeah.
And if you have questions, he's here all night.
I'm gonna have a drink. Ja, snacks was het oké?
Heel goed.
Welke Rob?
Als een vedel.
Ja. Moet ik hem niet goed te doen? Of heb je problemen mee?
Nee hoor, ik heb Rob in allereerste job aangenomen bij een bandtest.
Ah, oké. Dus kleine wereld.